I thought I was being generous when I agreed to let my sister-in-law stay for just a week or two. I had no idea she had already mapped out every corner of my house, calculated exactly how much she could extract from our life, and that my husband had been quietly enabling the entire scheme for months before I even knew a visit was being planned. What I believed was a simple act of family hospitality turned out to be the most carefully orchestrated ambush I had ever walked into. And the person holding the blueprint was not only Dana, it was the man who kissed me goodbye each morning, who squeezed my hand during movies, who told me he loved me right before the lights went out. The week I finally understood the full scope of what was happening, I found a folder on Mark's laptop. Not because I had been digging through his things in suspicion, because he left it open on the kitchen counter as though, somewhere in the back of his mind, he wanted the weight of it to be over. Or perhaps he had simply grown so comfortable with the deception that caution had stopped feeling necessary. Either way, the folder was there, the screen still glowing in the gray morning light. Inside were spreadsheets with dates and dollar amounts, a chain of emails going back 7 months, and a neatly formatted document titled Shared Living Arrangement, Long-Term Plan. My name appeared nowhere in the planning documents. Dana's name appeared 12 times, except at the very bottom of one final file, where my name appeared once, typed into a signature line, waiting. Before I get to all of that, let me take you back to a Sunday morning in early March, because that is where this story truly begins. The house smelled like coffee and clean laundry. That specific combination, dark roast from the French press Mark made every weekend, warm cotton from the dryer I'd run the night before, had become the smell of safety to me, of everything I had quietly built over the last 4 years. The house itself was mine in every way that mattered. I had put down the deposit from savings I'd accumulated before we were even married, working double shifts as an accounting manager for 3 years, while everyone my age was spending their money on vacations and expensive dinners. I had chosen the pale sage paint in the kitchen, the wide plank floors in the hallway, the clawfoot tub I refinished myself on a humid August afternoon with paint fumes and a true crime podcast for company. Mark had moved in when we married, and he loved the house the way guests love a good hotel. Appreciatively, comfortably, without ever really wondering what it cost to maintain. He worked in IT sales, decent money but inconsistent, the kind of income that rode waves. I was the stable one, the one who paid the mortgage on the first of every month, the one who kept the spreadsheet tracking utilities and repairs, and the 5-year savings goals I reviewed every January. It was never a source of tension between us. It was simply the architecture of our lives. I was 34 years old. I had a job I was proud of, a home I had made beautiful, and a marriage I genuinely believed in. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. I was not naive in the way people sometimes mean when they say it about women who've been deceived. I was not so in love that I refused to look. I missed the signs because the person hiding them was someone I had chosen to trust completely, and he had spent 6 years giving me no reason to revise that choice. Until now. Mark's sister, Dana, was 3 years younger than him, 30 years old, with a son named Tyler who had just turned 6. She had been through what the family diplomatically called a rough patch, a divorce 2 years prior, a move to a cheaper apartment on the east side of the city, a string of jobs in retail and hospitality that lasted months rather than years. Dana and I had never been truly close, but we had always been cordial. She laughed loudly at her own jokes and borrowed things without asking. She remembered my birthday but never sent a card on time. She had the quality that certain people have of existing at a slight tilt to their surroundings, always slightly more present in a room than was quite comfortable, always slightly too familiar with spaces that didn't belong to her. Small irritations. I had cataloged them over the years the way you catalog small irritations about family, not to use against them, but so you know what you are working with. Nothing that had ever felt like a threat. Mark adored her the way only an older sibling can adore a younger one, with total blindness to faults, with a protectiveness that bent seamlessly toward enabling. When she called crying, he always answered. When she needed money, he always found a reason why lending it made sense. When her marriage ended, he drove 4 hours in the middle of the night to help her pack her things and get out. I had respected that loyalty, even when it cost us. I had told myself, this is who he is. You knew this when you married him. The Sunday it started, Mark came to find me while I was watering the plants on the back porch. It was early, the light still pale and soft, the neighbor's dog somewhere down the block raising his usual complaint against the Saturday morning mailbox. Mark had his coffee mug in both hands. He always held it that way when he was about to say something he'd already decided on. And he had that particular expression I had come to recognize over 6 years. The slight crease between his eyebrows, the way he let one breath pass before he started speaking, the look he wore when he wanted something he already knew I wouldn't immediately love. "Dana called last night," he said. I kept watering the begonias. "Is she okay?" "She's been having trouble with her building. A mold issue. Inspector came out. They're saying it could take several weeks to remediate. She can't stay there while the work is happening." He paused, and I could feel him watching the side of my face. I told her she could stay here for a bit, just until it's sorted. I set the watering can down slowly. The morning light was very pretty, gold on the old wooden fence. I remember thinking, quite deliberately, that I would not react from the first feeling that rose in me, which was an immediate and uncomplicated refusal. I breathed instead. "How long is a bit?" I asked. "A week, maybe 2. "Tyler, too?" "Of course Tyler, too. He's her kid." "A week. 2 at most." I thought of the guest room I had spent a full weekend painting and furnishing, the navy linen curtains, the reading lamp from the antique market on 5th, the white desk I'd refinished for when my parents came to visit. I thought of Tyler's 6-year-old energy, the way he moved through rooms like a small natural disaster. Not malicious, just constitutionally incapable of stillness. I thought about my mornings, my quiet, my routine. I thought through all of this in the span of about 4 seconds, and then I heard myself say, "Okay, a week or 2. Mark's whole face relaxed like tension leaving a rope. "You're amazing," he said, and he leaned in and pressed his lips to my temple, and I believed him completely. That was my first mistake. Dana and Tyler arrived on a Thursday evening with 2 rolling suitcases, a duffel bag, a large plastic storage bin labeled kitchen in black marker, and a box of Tyler's toys that occupied most of the hallway floor the moment they came through the door. I stood watching Mark carry everything inside, laughing with his sister, easy and warm, with the total ease of a man who has never once worried about the logistics of anything. Dana kissed my cheek and said, "Clara, you are an absolute lifesaver. I mean it. I genuinely don't know what I'd do without you two." Her perfume was heavy, something musky and floral that settled into the hallway like a second presence and lingered long after she'd moved into the kitchen to investigate what we had for dinner. Tyler ran straight past me into the living room and immediately sent the small ceramic lamp on the side table rocking. It didn't fall, but the sound of it, that hollow spinning wobble on the wood, lived in my chest for the rest of the evening. "Ty," Dana said mildly from the kitchen. He ignored her. I steadied the lamp. The first week was disorienting but manageable. Tyler was loud and in constant motion, which is simply what 6-year-old boys are, and I could not hold it against him. Dana cooked big, fragrant meals and left pots soaking in the sink and rearranged my spice rack into an order I have never once figured out the logic of. She made herself coffee in the morning without asking and watched television in the living room at a volume 2 notches higher than I ever chose. She used the last of the good shampoo and didn't mention it. She asked me to pick Tyler up from school twice, which I did because saying no felt like an overreaction when someone was going through a hard time. Small frictions, the normal sandpaper of cohabitation. I was patient, I told myself. It is temporary. By day 10, though, I started noticing other things. Dana asked me very casually in the middle of unloading the dishwasher one afternoon how much I had paid for the house. Not the monthly payment, the original purchase price. I told her I couldn't remember off the top of my head, which was a lie, and I suspect we both knew it. 2 days after that, she asked whether Mark's name was on the deed. I said that was an unusual question. She laughed easily and said she was just curious how these things worked, thinking ahead to buying her own place eventually. I let it go. But the question stayed the way certain questions do. Not loudly, just present, just below the surface. A small pressure you only feel when you stop distracting yourself. Mark, during all of this, was almost aggressively comfortable. I would come downstairs late in the evening and find him and Dana at the kitchen table, speaking quietly, and they would pause when I appeared. Not in a way that looked guilty exactly, but in a way that looked complete. The way a conversation looks when it has reached a natural resting point. They would smile and fold me in easily and talk about something general, something easy, and I would sit there and drink a glass of water and tell myself, they have 30 years of shared history. There are conversations I will simply never be in the room for. That is normal. I told myself it was normal for another week and a half. By day 22, I sat down with Mark after Tyler was in bed and asked gently whether Dana had any update on the apartment timeline. He set down his phone and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not quite defensive, not quite dismissive, but somewhere in the narrow, uncomfortable space between them. The remediation company had apparently discovered the problem was more extensive than the first inspection suggested. It was going to be at least another 2 weeks. She has nowhere else to go, Clara. She has a kid. I can't tell her to go to a hotel. His tone was the tone people use when the person they're speaking to is being unreasonable, and I had not been unreasonable. I had asked a question. But when someone who knows you well speaks to you in that tone, you begin to question your own reasonableness with a speed that is almost impressive. That is the insidious thing about living alongside someone for 6 years. They know every pressure point, and sometimes they use them without even meaning to. I let it go. Another week. Then Dana found the storage closet. I kept a small closet off the laundry room for important documents, the house deed, insurance policies, my grandfather's old financial records I'd been slowly digitizing, and a small fireproof box that held my passport, my original birth certificate, and the paperwork from my mother's estate. The door had never been locked because it had never needed to be. I came home one afternoon to find the light on and the door open, and Dana standing just outside it with an expression that had been one thing a half-second earlier and smoothed itself into something else by the time she heard my footsteps. "Sorry," she said, with a light, untroubled smile. "I was looking for extra towels." The extra towels lived on the shelf in the hallway bathroom, exactly where they had always lived, exactly where Dana had retrieved them a dozen times over the past 3 weeks. "They're in the bathroom," I said. My voice was very even. "Oh, right, of course, I don't know where my head is today." She laughed softly and walked past me toward the hall. I stood in the laundry room for a long moment after she left. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, which was an odd thing to notice. I went to the closet. The fireproof box was still locked. The deed folder appeared to be in place. I told myself everything was fine. I told myself I was catastrophizing. I told myself she had simply opened the wrong door, and that reasonable people open wrong doors all the time. And that building a case out of a wrong door was the kind of paranoid thinking that poisoned relationships. I was very good at talking myself out of things that turned out to be true. It was day 34 when everything stopped. Mark had left for work early. The morning was the particular gray of late March, cold and low-ceilinged, the furnace cycling on and off with a dull, metallic click. Tyler was at school. Dana had mentioned she was going to the grocery store. I had the house to myself for what felt, in that moment, like a small miracle. The silence of my own home, the unhurried quality of a morning without other people in it. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and felt something unclench in my chest that I hadn't known was clenched. I opened my laptop to work from home. I cleared emails, answered 2 invoices, refilled my coffee. I was walking back from the counter when I noticed Mark's laptop sitting open beside the fruit bowl. He must have forgotten it. It happened sometimes, especially when he was running late. The screen was still on, the brightness turned up, and as I passed it, I saw the window that was open on the display. A folder in his documents, named, in plain gray text, Shared Living Arrangement, Long-Term Plan. I stopped. My coffee mug was warm against both palms. The furnace clicked off, and in the silence that followed, the house felt enormous and very still. I set my mug on the counter. I sat down in front of his laptop. Inside the folder, there were 7 files. The first was a spreadsheet titled Monthly Costs Shared, which divided our mortgage, utilities, groceries, and insurance into 3 columns labeled with our names: mine, Mark's, and Dana's. Under Dana's column, every cell read 0, with a note in the margin, until stable, then renegotiate. The second and third files were email chains between Mark and Dana. The earliest email in the thread was dated the previous October, 7 months ago, 3 months before Dana had ever mentioned a mold problem, 3 months before any of this had supposedly begun. In those emails, written in the patient, unhurried language of people discussing a plan they'd had plenty of time to refine, my husband and his sister talked about the logistics of her moving in permanently, which room Tyler would take, how to frame the conversation with me, how long they should wait before raising the question of longer-term arrangements. Clara is reasonable, Mark had written. She just needs time to get used to the idea. I read that sentence 3 times. The 4th file was labeled Deed Consultation Notes and contained what appeared to be a summary of a conversation with someone referred to only as RL, almost certainly a lawyer, about the process of adding a co-occupant's name to a residential property title and the legal protections that could be established through a cohabitation agreement. The 5th file was the one that made the floor tilt beneath me. It was titled Family Cohabitation Agreement, formatted as a legal document, 4 pages long, unsigned. It named all 4 of us as permanent residents of my house, the house I had bought, the house whose mortgage I paid alone, the house I had refinished and painted and made into the specific intentional home I had always wanted. Paragraph 4 contained a clause stipulating that in the event of the dissolution of the marriage between Mark and Clara, Dana's right to occupy the property would be protected by the terms of this agreement and could not be terminated without 60 days' notice and mediation. At the bottom of the document, below Mark's signature line and Dana's signature line, there was a 3rd line, Clara Bennett, my name, typed in clean black letters, waiting. The document had been drafted 6 weeks ago. Dana had been living in my house for 34 days, and my husband, the man who kissed my temple on a Sunday morning and called me amazing, had not said one single word. I sat very still for a long time. My hands were not shaking, which surprised me. What I felt was not the hot, immediate eruption of panic I might have expected. It was something quieter and far more frightening. The specific cold that comes when the temperature of the world drops several degrees all at once and you understand, without any drama, that you have been standing in a different story than the one you thought you were in. I closed the laptop. I looked at the fruit bowl, the coffee maker, the pale sage paint I had chosen because it made me feel calm. I thought, how long have you known exactly what you were doing? And then I thought, it doesn't matter. What matters is what I do next. I did not confront Mark that night. That is the part people find surprising when I tell this story, because the instinct, the immediate, animal instinct, would have been to call him the moment I stepped away from that laptop and scream every word I had just read back at him in the order I'd found them. I understand that instinct. I felt it move through me like a current, and then I let it pass. because I understood something in the cold and specific clarity of that moment. I was not dealing with an impulsive situation. I was dealing with a plan that had been 7 months in the making, that involved legal consultation, that had my name typed into a signature line I had never been shown. You do not fight a plan with an explosion. You fight it with a better plan. I closed Mark's laptop. I finished my coffee. I took a shower, got dressed, and drove to the office as though it were a completely ordinary day. I sat through 2 meetings and answered my emails, and at lunch I locked myself in my car in the parking garage and called my father. My father, Robert, is a man of very few words and very precise ones. He is 67 years old, he spent 30 years as a civil engineer, and he has the particular quality of people who have spent their careers identifying structural failures. He sees the exact point where something has been built wrong, and he names it without decoration. When I was growing up, he was not the parent you went to for comfort. He was the parent you went to when you needed to know what was true. I told him everything. I read him the key lines from what I had seen. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line, very steady, the way he breathes when he is thinking through weight calculations. When I finished, there was a pause of about 4 seconds. "Don't touch anything on that laptop," he said. "Don't let him know you saw it. Tonight I want you to call Miriam Chen." Miriam Chen was a family law attorney. She'd gone to law school with my father's younger sister. He had her number memorized. "Okay," I said. "Clara." He paused again. "You are not going to lose that house." I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and breathed. "Okay," I said again. It was the only word I trusted myself with. I called Miriam Chen that afternoon and had an appointment the following morning. I drove there before Mark was awake, told him I had an early meeting. Miriam was a small, meticulous woman in her 50s with an office full of plants and the expression of someone who had heard every version of every story and judged none of them. I showed her photographs I had taken of Mark's laptop screen. I had gone back that evening while he was watching television and quietly, carefully documented every file in the folder. She reviewed the images with no visible reaction beyond a slight tightening at the corners of her mouth when she reached the cohabitation agreement. "The good news," she said, setting her reading glasses on her desk, "is that this document is unsigned. It has no legal standing whatsoever." She tapped the photograph. "However, the intent here is clear, and the pattern of behavior you're describing, the extended, unauthorized occupancy, the financial planning conducted without your knowledge or consent, the consultation with legal counsel behind your back, this is actionable. The house is solely in your name?" "Yes." "And your husband is on the mortgage?" "No. He was not employed at the time we closed. I am the sole borrower." She nodded once, and I could see something shift slightly in her assessment. "Then your position is stronger than you may think. As the sole owner of record and the sole mortgage holder, you have the legal right to determine who occupies the property. You can issue a formal notice to vacate to your sister-in-law. If she does not comply within the legally required period, you can pursue eviction proceedings. The fact that your husband invited her does not transfer any property rights to her." She folded her hands. "What I'd suggest is that you do not move on this alone. Let me draft the documentation. I'd also strongly recommend that you send written notice through me, so there is no ambiguity about the legal nature of the request." I sat in her office for 90 minutes. When I left, I had a clear map of what the next 2 weeks would look like. I drove home. I made dinner. I sat across from Mark and Dana at my kitchen table, and I passed the bread basket and I asked Tyler about his day at school, and I held every single thing I knew inside my chest like a stone in a closed fist, and I smiled, and I was perfectly calm. That is the part I am most proud of, honestly. 3 days later, the letter arrived. Miriam had it hand-delivered on a Tuesday afternoon, addressed to Dana at my home address, formal and correct, a notice to vacate, citing the provisions of state tenancy law as they applied to a non-paying, non-leaseholding occupant, requiring her to vacate the premises within 14 days of the date on the letter. I was in the kitchen when she opened it. I heard the paper unfold. I heard, very distinctly, the pause that followed. Then Dana walked into the kitchen holding the letter with both hands, and the expression on her face was something I had not seen before. Not the easy warmth she deployed like a tool, not the practiced bafflement she wore when she wanted to seem innocent. This was something stripped down to its actual structure. Tight, cold, calculating. She looked at me for a long moment before she spoke. "What is this?" "It's a legal notice," I said. My voice was very quiet, very even. I had been saving this voice for exactly this moment. It explains the situation clearly. "Clara," she set the letter on the counter, "I think we need to talk about this like adults." "I've been an adult this entire time," I said. "Sit down, Dana." She sat. I stayed standing. I had decided at some point during the previous 72 hours that this was one conversation I was not going to have from a seated position. "I saw the folder," I said, "on Mark's laptop, the one that has been open for 7 months, the one with the spreadsheet and the emails and the agreement with my name typed at the bottom, the cohabitation agreement that I never saw, never agreed to, and never signed." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever been in the middle of. Dana held very still, and I could see her running calculations behind her eyes with the focused speed of someone who has been preparing for exactly this confrontation and is now deciding which prepared response fits the current moment best. "That was just an idea we were exploring," she said finally. "Nothing was decided. Nobody was trying to force anything on you." 7 months of emails, I said. A legal consultation, a 4-page document with a signature line. That is not an idea. That is a plan. "A plan for what?" Her voice sharpened. "A plan for a family to live together? Is that so criminal? I am his sister, Clara. I have a child. You have a house with extra rooms and no children in it. We thought—" "We," I said, and I let that word sit between us like a blade. She stopped. "Mark knew," I said. "He has known since October. He sat with me on a Sunday morning and told me you needed help with a mold problem and asked me if you could stay for a week or two, and he had been planning this since October." I waited. "Is there a mold problem, Dana?" The pause was answer enough. "The lease on your apartment ends in 2 months," I said quietly. I had confirmed this the day after my meeting with Miriam, with a single phone call to the building management company, a question about lease renewal timelines. The woman on the phone had been helpful. "You're not renewing it. You never planned to. This was always the plan. Move in for a temporary stay, run out the clock until I was used to having you here, then present me with a document and ask me to sign." I looked at her steadily. "Did you honestly think I would sign it?" "I thought," she said, and her voice had changed again. Lower, more careful, stripped of its earlier indignation, "that Mark would talk to you, that you two would discuss it properly. This was meant to be a conversation." "A conversation is something that happens before you hire a lawyer and draft an agreement," I said. "What you did is called a fait accompli, and it's over." Mark came home at 6:15 to find Dana and me sitting at the kitchen table in silence. The letter between us, and whatever he read in my face when he walked through the door, told him immediately that the conversation he had been avoiding for months had arrived. He stood in the hallway with his keys still in his hand, and he looked at the letter, and then he looked at me. And the expression he wore was one I will not forget for a long time. Not guilt, not grief, but the hollowed-out look of a man who has been caught and who is calculating even now whether there is a way to reframe what has happened. "I can explain," he said. Those were the 2 words I had least wanted to hear, because they confirmed that there was no version of this in which he had simply been passive. Passive people do not explain. Passive people are confused. He was not confused. He had known exactly what he was doing. "Sit down," I said. He sat. He did not look at Dana. He looked at me. "Tell me when it started," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then slowly, carefully, he began to talk. He told me that Dana had come to him in September, not October, September, earlier than even the emails had indicated. After getting notice that her building was being sold and her rent would increase by 40% upon renewal. He told me she had cried for 2 hours on the phone. He told me he had spent 3 weeks trying to think of a solution, and the solution he had arrived at was that she could come and live with us. Because the house was large enough, because we had the space, because Tyler needed stability. He said he had told himself he would bring it up with me properly once Dana was already here, and I had seen how smoothly it worked. He said he thought once I was used to having them, I would agree that it made sense. "You thought," I said, "that if you simply installed your sister in my home without my consent and gave me enough time to get comfortable with the arrangement, I would eventually sign a document giving her permanent residency rights in my house." He flinched. "When you put it like that, that is what it is," I said. "There is no other way to put it. It's my home too," he said quietly. "Your name is not on the deed," I said equally quietly. "Your name is not on the mortgage. You have contributed to the utility bills and the grocery budget, which I appreciate, and you have lived here for 6 years as my husband, which I have valued more than anything else in my life." I could feel the heat building behind my eyes, but I held it back because I refused to cry in front of Dana, who was still sitting at the other end of the table saying nothing, watching us the way someone watches a fire they started. "But the house is mine. I built it. I bought it. And what you have tried to do, you and your sister together behind my back, is take something from me using a legal document I was never supposed to see until you were ready to present it. That's not—" He stopped. "Is there anything in that folder that I should know about that I haven't found yet?" I asked. Silence. "Mark." He looked at the table. "There was another draft," he said very quietly. "An earlier version of the agreement. That one had a clause about renaming the shared costs in a way that would have given Dana's occupancy some legal weight over time, a kind of adverse possession argument if it ever came to that. RL said it wouldn't hold up, so we dropped it." The table was very solid and real under my hands. I kept them flat against it because I needed the sensation of something solid, adverse possession. My husband had consulted a lawyer about whether his sister could, over time, establish a legal claim to my home, the one I had saved for, the one that smelled like coffee and clean laundry on Sunday mornings. "Get out," I said. He looked up. "Not permanently," I said, and my voice was remarkable to me for how steady it was. "I am not making a permanent decision tonight, but I need you to stay somewhere else for the next 2 weeks while I think, and I need your sister out of my house within the 14 days specified in the notice. Those are not requests." Dana opened her mouth. I looked at her once, and she closed it again. "Clara," Mark started. "I have a lawyer," I said. "She knows everything. If I need to move forward with formal proceedings, I will. But right now, I am giving you the chance to do this without that, because I still don't know what the rest of my life looks like, and I am not ready to make that choice tonight. But this—" I touched the edge of the notice to vacate. "This is not negotiable. She leaves." He stayed at his friend Paul's apartment. Dana packed her things over the next 4 days. Not 14, 4, because I think she understood, once the warmth and the theater had been stripped away, that there was no version of this in which she stayed. Tyler said goodbye to me at the front door with the blameless confusion of a 6-year-old who doesn't understand why the visit is ending, and I hugged him and told him to be good, because none of what had happened was his fault. When their car pulled out of the driveway, I went back inside, and I stood in the hallway, and I was alone in my house for the first time in 40 days. I sat on the kitchen floor. I'm not sure how long I sat there. long enough for the afternoon light to travel from the window over the counter to the window over the sink, long enough to cry until it stopped feeling useful and then to stop, long enough to feel the specific quality of silence that is my silence, my house, my quiet, my life, the furniture I had chosen, the walls I had painted, the floors I had finished on my hands and knees on a summer afternoon years ago when the whole thing had still been a hope rather than a fact. Mine, I thought, still mine. The question of Mark took longer. I want to be honest about that because this is not a story about a woman who knew immediately what she wanted. I spent 3 weeks at my father's house. I slept in my childhood bedroom, and I walked in the mornings, and I let myself be cooked for, which was something I hadn't let anyone do in years. My father left cups of tea outside my door at night without knocking, and I thought about that every time I found one. Small, solid love, the kind that holds its shape. Mark and I had 4 conversations. He came to every one of them fully, which I will say for him. He did not hide. He did not minimize. He sat across from me and answered everything I asked, and he did not offer excuses, only explanations, which is a different thing, though the distinction matters less than I once thought. He had been afraid, he said, of Dana's need, of his failure to protect her, of the conversation with me he hadn't known how to start. He had told himself for 7 months that the outcome would justify the approach. He had been wrong. He knew that. He said it clearly more than once without me prompting it. I asked him once in the second conversation, if the document had been ready and signed by Dana and witnessed, would you have given it to me to sign? Would you have asked me to? He was quiet for a very long time. I think, he said slowly, I had stopped asking myself that question. I had been focused on the steps between now and then, and I stopped looking at what then actually looked like. He paused, which means I don't know, and I think that's the most honest answer I can give you. It was the most honest answer he could give me. I respected it, and it cost me something to respect it. And I sat with both of those things for a long time. We went to couples therapy, 12 sessions with a woman named Dr. Anand, who had the gift of asking exactly the question you were trying not to answer. I will not reconstruct all of those conversations here, because some of them belong only to the 2 of us. What I will say is that they were necessary, and they were hard, and at the end of the 12th session, I had a clearer picture of my marriage than I had ever had before. Its actual dimensions, its actual weight, the places where it was strong, and the places where the load-bearing walls had been quietly compromised. Like a structural survey, my father would have approved of the metaphor. We are still together. That is not the ending everyone would choose for this story, and I understand that. It is not a fully happy ending, which is to say it is not an ending at all. It is a continuation, a harder and more honest one than we had before. Mark had a lawyer draw up a formal domestic partnership property agreement at Miriam's recommendation, which establishes clearly and legally that the house is mine alone, that no third party may be granted occupancy without my written consent, and that this agreement supersedes any future informal arrangements. He signed it without being asked twice. I think that mattered. Dana and I have not spoken. I hold no particular bitterness toward her. She wanted stability for herself and her son, and she made choices I found unforgivable. But she is not a monster. She is a person who was afraid and chose a dishonest path toward safety. What I cannot forgive is the specific coldness of the execution, the months of planning, the legal consultation, the document with my name already typed in, the 34 days of living in my home under false pretenses while she opened my storage closet looking for documents she could use. That was not desperation. That was deliberate. And it will not happen again, because I no longer have the version of myself that would have let it. It is late summer now, 6 months since the Sunday morning with the French press coffee and the watering can, and the question I should have asked a different way. The begonias on the back porch came in beautifully this year. I have been more attentive to them, somehow, since all of this. I sit out there in the mornings with my coffee, and I notice the light on the old wooden fence, and I think about what the word mine actually means when you've had to fight for it. It doesn't mean exclusive. It doesn't mean alone. It means known, completely, deliberately, without pretense. It means I understand what I have and why I have it and what it costs to build it. Nobody is going to take that from me without a fight, and I know now that I am a person who will fight. That is the thing I did not know about myself before this, and it is, in a way I didn't expect, the most valuable thing I own. My father came for dinner last week. He sat in the kitchen and I made pasta with the good olive oil, and we talked about nothing important. And at one point, he looked around the kitchen, the sage green walls, the afternoon light, the plants on the windowsill, and he said quietly, "You made something good here, Clara." I looked around too. "Yeah," I said, "I did." And I meant it. The way you can only mean something after you've had to defend it.